I'm Hira Jafri, and I'm here today with Selassie Atadika, who's the inaugural Global Table Fellow at Yale University. Chef Salasi is from Ghana. She's a founding member of Trio Toke, the first nomadic restaurant in Dakar, Senegal, and she is the chef owner of Midu, a nomadic and private dining experience in Accra, Ghana, that offers new African cuisine. In addition to completing coursework with the Culinary Institute of America, she holds a bachelor's in geography from Dartmouth College and a master's in international affairs from Columbia University. Global Table is a collaboration between the Whitney and Betty MacMillan Center for International and Area Studies at Yale, the Yale Schwarzman Center, and Yale Hospitality. Centered around bringing culinary thought leaders from around the world to campus, the program aims to illuminate the connections between sustainability, health, culture, and community. While in residence, each visitor trains staff, connects with students and researchers, and offers remarks over a meal of their own devising. Welcome, Chef.
Thank you.
Now, before your culinary career, you were engaged in humanitarian work with the United Nations for more than a decade. What inspired that career change for you?
I think there were quite a few different pivotal moments. Some of them were as simple as conversations I had with colleagues that were working with the UN and other NGOs and things. And I just realized that their understanding of our cuisine was just not the most positive. And I actually wanted to showcase and show them what I knew and loved as a child. And others of it were much more intense, such as moments where I could see that food could be a solution to some of the major issues that we were having in the continent, from health and nutrition to sort of the economic issues that were coming out of conflict or part of the conflict in the first place. And I just felt that I could do more through food and food systems change. And so that's really what really pushed me to, just jump back in and try to figure out how do we create a platform where we can understand better the supply and demand and create the demand for the right types of food and redesign sort of the food systems for the continent in a way that makes sense for where we are today.
Now, in that wavelength, we've heard you speak about Africa's cultural and culinary heritage and also about sustainability and biodiversity. What are the connections between all of this?
Well, my first degree is in geography, so I always kind of say what grows where we are is what we should be eating. So starting from that initial location, you start to see what grows here, which means historically that's what we've been eating. And there are stories around those dishes or those ingredients, whether it's about the medicinal properties or whether it's about the technical way of cooking it. Like if you, for example, there's some ingredients that if you eat them raw, make you sick. But if you cook them, they're really nutritious. And so understanding how we started eating those foods in those ways is really important. But I think for me, one of the things I really started seeing was how it puts back into the economy and how when you study what is growing in certain parts of the continent, you start to understand what are the right foods for our future, what are the right foods for climate change and for, the erratic rainfalls and the desertification that we're planning to see in the next years and decades.
Yeah. Now, in addition to local and seasonal ingredients, which you've mentioned, you also emphasize underutilized ingredients.
Yeah.
Why are they also important?
So from the point of view of sustainability, biodiversity, it's really important for us to have as much as possible. Most of the world is, I think 70% of our calories are coming from 4 crops, rice, corn, wheat, and soy. And the soy is actually almost like a byproduct because that's what we're feeding animals to then consume. But for me, it's like, how can we actually eat wider? There's a friend of mine who's Liberian, and we were having a conversation about food. And one of the things she told me, as a child in Liberia, she was taught what not to eat. Not what to eat, but what not to eat, because the list of poisonous or dangerous foods is a lot smaller than what you can consume. And I think we need to be much more creative. From a chef's point of view, for me, it's like, how am I introducing something that nobody knows or very few people know? How do we bring, in many ways, like new letters to the alphabet that people have in terms of their flavor palette?
So in that same vein of thought, what's one ingredient that you wish everyone would use more? And the sort of opposite of that, what's one that you think should be used less than what it currently is?
I think for me, the one ingredient that I'm obsessed with is precasse. Precasse is a pod. It's a spice that is used in West African cooking. It comes from a tree that is currently endangered. So I'm hoping that the more people eat this or use this spice in their cooking, hopefully the less likely these trees are to be cut down and they'll have more value in our ecosystem. An ingredient, it's hard to say, but I think I would say less wheat is probably what I would say. I think that there's so many amazing grains, whether it's teff, fonio, sorghum, that people should be eating and integrating into their diet. And I think a lot of those are climate smart crops. And I look forward to seeing more of them like popping into our menus and our dishes and our foods around the world.
Now, I want to sort of go back in your history to even before the culinary career, before the sort of humanitarian career, to your childhood. And you often said that as a child, you were in the kitchen close to your mother's apron strings. Yeah. Now, how did your childhood influence your passion for cooking and all the work that's come from it?
Yeah. I would honestly so I was born in Ghana, and before we moved to the U.S., in modern Ghanaian sort of architecture, what happens is there's the sort of modern kitchen, which has, the normal stove and everything. And then there's like sort of the quote unquote African kitchen, which is the outdoor space, which is normally used for some of the heavier work. So pounding fufu, grinding, and a lot of these other more traditional techniques that are being used to produce food. And I would literally be like sitting there pretending to do what my mom was doing alongside of her. We moved to the US and food became how we maintained a large part of our culture. So there's so many different markers in culture, whether it's clothing, it's language, it's, what you're eating. And that food was one of the things that we held on to as a family. My mom cooked very heavily. So I think it's her birthday and Mother's Day that she didn't cook. And I always tried to provide something for the family. But so for me, that's just seeing my mom, particularly in like the early 80s, being able to create Ghanaian dishes using whatever was seasonal and available in the US to create something that was comforting to us. Was something that I enjoyed and I wanted to share with others. So I started traveling and moving around. And so that was something that I remember actually taking along with me. There's one specific hot sauce or chili sauce. It's called shito that we use in Ghana. And it's one of these staples that a lot of Ghanaians keep with them. And it's one of those things that I continue to travel with. So food for me has been a way of a cultural marker, but also almost like a comfort blanket in a way of feeling at home or feeling safe and comfortable.
You've sparked another question for me, which is, what are the things that you, sort of food items that you travel with when you move around so extensively?
Honestly, the shito is the one that I take with me. So shito traditionally is a preserved sauce. It's onions, garlic, chili, ginger, and then it's dried shrimp that's been ground down, dried fish that's also been powdered. And all of this is cooked in oil until it actually turns black. And this is actually a traditional preservation technique. And now the sauce can last, forever. So even when I was, I think, in Kosovo and we had, it was actually, I think, 3 months after the NATO bombing and 1999. And I had gari, which is cassava, dried cassava. When you mix it with water, it sort of becomes an edible starch. And so it's eba. So I would have that with a tin of sardines and shito. If you wanted it for breakfast, you add a little bit of milk and sugar and you've got a breakfast sort of cereal. You can add peanuts or groundnuts to it and you're ready to go. So for me, I would say those are the two items that are kind of like always in my survival kit, and allow me to have something that feels at home. So, yeah.
And so versatile too.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to talk a little bit about Midu. So it's described as curating white table nomadic events. Mm-hmm. Can you help us to understand that culinary modality?
Yeah. So I would say that we have had We're flexible. So like I like adapting to different situations. So when I moved back to Ghana, I realized that the classic restaurant model was not going to work with what I wanted to do. I knew that I didn't want to cook what everybody was eating, and I needed something that would allow me to grow the demand for what I was doing. So at the beginning, we were more nomadic because my lifestyle prior to that had been very nomadic. And so I found different locations around Accra. We would move every month and have a different themed dinner in a different location. So maybe one would be sort of Moroccan cuisine. Another one might be Senegalese, but then it might be Southern African. And so we started moving around. We're a bit more sedentary now. So we have a location in Accra where we do our dinners, but how it kind of works is currently every quarter we have a new menu that's based on what's locally available and seasonal, but a theme that is I'm inspired by. And let's see, in the March season, we had, it was Ghana's independence in March. So we did a 3 months of a menu, which was inspired by regional cuisines of Ghana. Our current one is actually inspired by the diaspora, and it's looking at food that left the continent and went into the diaspora and what it looks like. So some of the dishes are coming from Jamaica. Some of them are from Brazil, which are, dishes that sort of came from Ghana or West Africa, I should say, and you see the transformation. So akara, which is a bean fritter, we also call it kose in Ghana, now becomes akaraje. So we share the information to our newsletter online, and whoever would like to join comes, and it's a communal table. And for us, Midu actually means come, let's eat in Ewe. And it's really about just bringing people to the table. I really feel that the experience should not feel like sort of a classic restaurant experience. It's a place where, again, I call it new African cuisine, where it's culture, community, and cuisine are coming together. And so many times people don't know each other. They're sitting at a table, and by the end of the night, they're sharing phone numbers and they're meeting up. And I just recently found out there's even like a small group within the group of customers that come regularly. And whenever they see a new menu posted, they're like, who's going? When are you going? And, they're having this whole conversation on Instagram to show up at the dinner because they met each other at the last dinner and they want to see each other again. So it's just, for me, it's a wonderful moment, which I think modern day life, particularly in Ghana, everyone is kind of like in their lane and in their zone, and you kind of don't meet people on the left and right. In Ghana, because people have a boarding school experience, they have people that they've grown up with that they know or that they work with, but they don't really get to intermix and meet new people. And it was interesting after COVID. During COVID, we kind of closed down, but coming out of it, we ended up doing individual tables. So if you booked 3 people, there would be 3 people together. And I remember a couple people actually came to me and they said, we miss the communal table. Like, when can we sit together again?
In a way, you've disrupted and built community, which is just so fantastic and heartwarming to hear about. Now, Midu also has a line of high-end chocolates. And of course, Ghana is known for its cocoa production. How does chocolate connect to important topics such as climate change, biodiversity, community, as we've discussed, and culture?
Yeah. So the chocolates is actually kind of an accident.
And aren't the best ideas always accidents?
We used to make these chocolates at the end of the meal. So sort of like a parting gift as people were leaving to have with their coffee or to take home. And people really enjoyed it, and they started asking for it after the meal. And so at that time, I was like, it can't be that hard. But as I really dug into it, I started seeing all the challenges in the cocoa industry, but I also started seeing opportunities. So in terms of what we do with our chocolates, a lot of it has to do with, again, disruption of the existing, I would say, structural injustice of the cocoa industry. The cocoa industry is built on the backs of, cash crops. So basically, I fundamentally believe in many ways, yes, cash crops had a positive potential impact on some economies for bringing in income, but in many ways, it's almost like the original lie, I like to say, because you're now growing food for other people, and not necessarily, you're growing food for other people to get Forex to now buy the food you need. So in many of these our countries, we're net importers of food. But the chocolate, I think, allows us, one, to now change the narrative on cocoa. It's no longer cocoa from Ghana, but now chocolate from Ghana. So we're actually adding value locally. We're able to create jobs, create an ecosystem around that. But I'm also using the chocolates as a space for conversation. So you're taking chocolate, what people know, and what they don't know, which is some of the flavors and the spices from the continent. So I mentioned earlier precasse, which is this amazing pod, and the flavor notes that I get from it are nutty, caramel, buttery notes that come from it. Normally it's used in savory food, but what I've done is put it in chocolate, which allows people who probably may not have palm nut soup with fufu, but would try the chocolates and get a sense of what that spice is about. Now, the chocolates allows me to bring in some of these underutilized ingredients. It helps to have the conversation about biodiversity, because this spice is actually on the list of Arc of Taste for slow food, one of the ingredients that's at risk of going extinct. So that's one space. But it's also a way for me to bring other ingredients that speak to other things. So right now we're working on something, bringing in sorghum and millet into the chocolate as a textural piece. And I think that's something where, again, you can have a conversation starting from where people already are. But in the conversation, I think it brings up other conversations. For example, right now, there's conversation about deforestation-free chocolate or cocoa. In order for that to work, we actually need to do new training of farmers. We need to actually have sort of interplanting, more of an agroforestry approach to cocoa. The cocoa farmers need to learn how to grow other crops. People like myself need to engage with them so that we're buying some of the ingredients that they're using or that they're growing, so that, you know, they actually have off-takers for their ingredients. For sure, I think, you know, when, for example, with my chocolate, it's quite traceable. We know the farmers that are growing the beans, they're growing it organically. And that's allowing us to be able to share high quality, ethically sourced chocolate with people. So it gives people another alternative to sort of the cheaper or fast or less ethically sourced options.
It also sounds like sort of this chocolate venture is also an experiment with accessibility, making ingredients that sort of might not have otherwise been approached more accessible.
Definitely. And for me, that's... in many ways, I see the chocolates as a almost gateway drug. So it's like, you might not know about precasse. And once you try the chocolates, you're going to be curious and you're going to want to ask more questions about it or look for it, or maybe now be incentivized to try. I don't know. We have a chocolate that's using ras hanout, which is a North African spice blend. You know, maybe you're going to try to figure out how to get some, and then you might make a tagine, or, you know, I think for me, it's the beginning of a conversation, and I want the chocolates to be an entry point into the continent. It's like a first step in to start to know more. And I think that, unfortunately, you know, for many, many decades, the continent seems to be the place where people know very little. And I just want, whether it's the designs on the chocolates or the names of the truffles, they're all named after different women, to start to humanize the continent, to allow us to normalize kente cloth and the name Adjoa, and understanding that merit is a name that comes from Ethiopia, and being able to have those conversations.
Now, you've mentioned sort of in this brief conversation ingredients and foods from all over the world, and you've traveled because of sort of all of these positions. Can you tell us some of the most inspirational places you visited and maybe how they've influenced sort of your approach to food? Yeah,
I think... I always say, people always like, what's your favorite country? Or, you know, and I like, it's kind of like picking a favorite shoe, you know. It's hard to do. I think every place has its space. I will, you know, I lived in Senegal for a while, and that's one of the ways I actually got into cooking. I was working there and I was living there, but what happens is you go to the most accessible places, which ended up being grocery stores, many of which were sort of French brands that were in Senegal. And I remember one day we were all having lunch and I was like, we keep eating, the same thing, but we don't really know much about Senegalese ingredients. Wouldn't it be great if we actually started exploring that? And so the friend I was with was like, yeah, why don't we just start a cooking club? And that's what we did. We started a cooking club, and once a month we would get together and have a list of what was available that season. And it was like, this is a fruit that I've never had before, but now I'm going to, make a sorbet out of it and see what happens. And so that's actually how we ended up starting Trio Toke. And it was 3 of us that were obsessed and realized that we were truly obsessed with food and wanted to learn more. And that's how that ball started rolling. But I think, I would say a lot of the times and moments that I would say have been inspired have been conversations in actually like villages. I love just tasting something and having a conversation. What am I having? What am I eating? And getting in to understand more about the culture through the food. There's a dish that I learned about in Congo Brazzaville, and that's just one of the ones that is still on my menu today. But I can also just be inspired by seeing a woman selling roasted plantain and peanuts on the roadside. So I just love taking inspiration from everywhere I can. Yeah, I tend to more village life, I would say. I'm a bit of I guess not necessarily a historian, but I do truly believe I learn a lot more from history and the past. And so there's actually this symbol in Ghana. It's a collection of symbols called Adinkra, and there's one that's called Sankofa, and it's a chicken that's sort of facing forward with its neck turned around, and it's in its mouth it has a golden egg, and it talks about basically learning from the past. And that's kind of what I really enjoy doing. And so I find that more rural areas give me that opportunity to sort of almost take a step back and start asking questions of why. Why is it this way? Like, why are we eating this? Why are you preparing it in this way? And those are actually, a lot of those conversations have given birth to me understanding conversations around sustainability and why people do the things they do and what elements of it we need to move forward. Because I think it's not always about just doing things the way we used to do. It needs to have a certain level of aspiration. And that's what allows, I think, some of the foodways and the dishes and things to go into the future. So I think that element of the innovation on top of it, and I mean innovation not necessarily like it has to be, molecular or something like that, but just that there's a new addition to it that speaks to the current context that makes somebody want to strive to reach that or to be in that new space.
Mm-hmm. And we're so privileged to sort of share the lessons that you've learned from turning towards the past and sort of sharing them with the future. And we've had you on campus for a residency. Mm-hmm. And sort of as part of that, your menu will be featured at one of the stations in the Yale Commons. Can you describe to us what we have to look forward to?
Yeah. So for the dishes that we're going to be at the Rooted station. So they're going to be very plant forward, which is one of the lessons that I've learned traveling around the continent. One of the dishes is one of my favorite dishes. It's called wache. It's a rice and beans dish, which I think fits into a lot of cultures, but it's a dish that comes from Ghana. The modern version of the dish that you would find in Ghana has a lot of things, but I pared it down to the sort of the basics, which is using rice and beans, and it's served with a tomato-based sauce. And there's the shita sauce that I mentioned. So we're going to do a vegan version of it using coconut. And for me, it's a dish that's craveable. When I have either really challenging days or I want to feel at home or I want to feel sort of just that comfort of food, that's what I go to. Another dish that we're going to feature on there is a dish from South Africa. It's using lentil, sweet potato, and butternut squash. It's almost kind of like a loaf that's finished off with a bit of an egg custard with a fruit chutney. So that's bringing in some of the Cape Malay flavors from Southern Africa. And then we're going to kind of skip up to North Africa. So we're going to be doing a mushroom kefta tagine. So it's kind of like stewed with in place of like sort of meatballs, we're going to do beautifully roasted mushrooms that are going to be in this tagine. We're going to be serving it with fonio instead of couscous, so that we have one of the ancient grains on the menu. And it's also gluten-free. And I think it's just going to be great for people to try something that they haven't had before. There'll be a couple of salads that will be on there. One coming from East Africa, kachumbari, which is like a cucumber, onion, and tomato salad. There's another relish coming from Southern Africa that's using cabbage. We're going to bring in a sesame sort of dressing with roasted seasonal vegetables, because I think it's always important to respect what's here. So it's not really about just bringing a whole bunch of stuff in from outside, but it is the season. It's going to be starting in November. So it's really about enjoying some of the winter vegetables as well.
That sounds so delicious.
Thanks.
I'm ready to eat already. Now, sort of, again, thinking about passing on these lessons to sort of current students and the community here at Yale, if you had one piece of advice for a young person just learning about food preparation and connecting menu with place and planet, what would it be?
I would say actually start from home. I think sometimes we underestimate what we can learn from home. And I'm a perfect example of it. When I was growing up, my mom did a lot of the cooking, and she cooked Ghanaian dishes. And I think at a certain point, I can tend to be a little bit competitive. So I kind of was like, what is my comparative advantage in this situation? So I actually started baking. So when I was, in first grade, I started making bread. And so it wasn't until later that I started learning the Ghanaian dishes. When I started traveling and I realized that I was going to miss the food that my mom would be cooking at home. And my mom, like most moms, probably just not measuring, just kind of like cooks from her heart and just makes the most amazing things. So I still do, because there's still a few dishes I still haven't mastered yet from her. Whenever she starts cooking, I literally stand right behind her and I'm like writing, taking down notes and trying to understand quantities, ratios. So I think starting from home, understanding where some of those dishes that you might be eating at home or have been eating, that your parent or a family member made for you, and understanding the stories behind it. Maybe it's a grandmother, maybe it's an auntie, maybe it's, whoever in your family that's been doing this one dish since forever and a day. And from there, just the curiosity. I think sometimes we just want to overcomplicate things, but sometimes it's as easy as I'm going to try a new spice or I'm going to try a new vegetable. So if you go to a restaurant, maybe there's an ingredient that you had on that menu and you don't necessarily, need to be a top chef or whatever, but when you roast your vegetables, you're going to sprinkle a little bit of that spice that you had in that restaurant on your food. And I think it's just exploring and having a little bit of curiosity about it.
Now we're running towards the end of our time here, but are there any sort of like lingering thoughts that you'd like to share with us before we end our conversation?
I think for me, the one thing that I would say is sometimes we can underestimate food, and it's about either, I'm hungry and I need something to eat, or I want to go to the super fancy restaurant that I read about. But I think we need to be more intentional about what and how we eat, because some people are eating 3 times a day. Some people, everyone's got different eating habits now, but we eat several times a day. And let's make sure each and every single one of those meals counts towards something. So they should count towards your values. They should count towards your health. They should count towards, sort of equity. And so just make every bite count.
Amazing. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure speaking to you and learning from your practice. Until our next conversation.
Thank you.